There are six families in America who came out richer after every major crash. 1873, 1929, 2008, 2020. While millions lost homes, jobs, savings, these families gained ground every single time. And right now, they're moving their assets in a pattern we haven't seen since 2007. You're about to learn why economic crashes aren't disasters for everyone. For a very small group of people, they're harvests. And you've been the crop. Here's what nobody tells you about American wealth. We love the bootstrap story, the self-made billionaire, the garage startup that becomes a Fortune 500 company. But that story hides something uncomfortable. According to a 2023 study from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, 35% of all wealth in America is inherited. And among the ultra-wealthy, those with over $30 million, that number jumps to over 60%. But inheritance isn't even the interesting part. The interesting part is timing. See, most families who inherit wealth lose it. 70% of wealthy families lose their fortune by the second generation, 90% by the third. That's a stat from the Williams Group Wealth Consultancy. For every dynasty that survived a century, dozens didn't. The Vanderbilts were once the richest family in America. By the 1970s, not a single Vanderbilt was a millionaire. The Pulitzers, the Guggenheims, most of the railroad barons gone. So how do some families break that pattern? How do certain dynasties not only hold on to their wealth for 5, 6, 7 generations, but actually grow it? The answer isn't smarter kids, it isn't better education. It's crisis. The families I'm about to show you didn't just survive American collapses, they engineered their entire wealth strategy around them. They hold cash when everyone else holds debt. They buy when everyone else sells. They have access to information and liquidity that you never will. And the most disturbing part? The same playbook that worked in 1873 still works today. 6 families, 1 pattern. Let me show you exactly how it works. Let's start with the family that literally wrote the playbook. The Morgans. In 1907, America faced a banking panic. Stock prices crashed 50% in 3 weeks. Banks were failing. People were lining up to withdraw their savings before their bank collapsed. The U.S. government had no central bank, no Federal Reserve, no mechanism to stop the bleeding. So who stepped in? One man, J.P. Morgan. Morgan gathered the leading bankers of New York in his private library. He literally locked them inside until they agreed to pool their money and bail out the failing banks. He saved the American financial system. He was celebrated as a hero. But here's what the history books gloss over. During that same panic, Morgan and his associates bought controlling stakes in U.S. Steel, Tennessee Coal and Iron Company, and multiple railroad lines, all at fire sale prices. According to financial historian Ron Chernow, Morgan's net worth increased by an estimated $50 million during the panic of 1907. Adjusted for inflation, that's over $1.5 billion today. He wasn't just saving the system, he was acquiring it. By 1912, the Pujo Committee in Congress found that Morgan and his partners held 341 directorships in 112 corporations worth over $22 billion, roughly $700 billion today. They didn't build that empire in good times. They built it in bad times. 6 years after Morgan saved the banking system, the Federal Reserve was created. Guess who helped design it? Morgan's associates. The system that was supposed to prevent future panics was shaped by the people who profited from the last one. But the Morgans were just one family. Let me show you who was doing the same thing in a different industry. John D. Rockefeller didn't become the richest American in history by drilling more oil. He became the richest American by buying oil companies when they couldn't afford to stay open. The Panic of 1873 kicked off what historians call the Long Depression. 6 years of economic contraction, oil prices collapsed by 75%. Small oil producers couldn't survive. They were selling their operations for pennies on the dollar just to pay their debts. Rockefeller had cash, and he had credit lines from banks that were still solvent, including Morgan's banks. Between 1873 and 1879, Standard Oil acquired over 90% of American oil refining capacity. Not because Rockefeller was a better businessman, because he was the only one with liquidity during the collapse. His own letters archived at the Rockefeller Archive Center show his strategy explicitly. In 1875, he wrote, "The conditions are favorable for taking over properties. The refiners are in distress. Distress meant opportunity. Standard Oil maintained enormous cash reserves during boom times. Analysts called it inefficient. Why hold cash when you could invest it? Rockefeller knew something they didn't. Cash during a boom is lazy. Cash during a panic is a weapon." In March 2020, when COVID crashed the markets, Rockefeller Capital Management, the family's current wealth vehicle, disclosed major purchases of energy assets at 40-year lows. Same playbook, 150 years later, but Rockefeller was buying physical assets. What about the families who controlled something even more valuable? Land. John Jacob Astor made his first fortune in fur trading. But in the 1830s, he started doing something unusual. He was buying undeveloped land north of New York City. At the time, people thought he was crazy. Manhattan ended at 14th Street. Everything north was farms and swamp. Then came the panic of 1837. Land prices crashed. Foreclosures exploded. Astor bought more. By the time he died in 1848, he owned most of what would become Midtown Manhattan. His strategy was simple: buy on the fringe and wait. His descendants didn't sell that land, they leased it. For the next 150 years, the Astor family collected ground rent on some of the most valuable real estate on earth. When the economy crashed, they didn't suffer. Their tenants paid the rent or got evicted. New tenants moved in. The income stream continued. When the economy boomed, the land appreciated. They got richer either way. By 1890, the Astors were worth an estimated $150 million, about $5 billion today. This is what separates dynastic wealth from ordinary wealth. You and I think about assets as things we own. These families think about assets as positions. Positions that generate income in good times and acquire more in bad times. Now let me show you the family that turned this into a 223-year science. The DuPont family has been wealthy for 223 years. Let me say that again, 223 years. They survived the War of 1812, the Civil War, 2 World Wars, the Great Depression, every recession since. How? The DuPonts practice what wealth managers call controlled opportunism. During World War I, DuPont manufactured 40% of all explosives used by Allied forces. They made $250 million in 4 years, around $6 billion today. But here's what matters. They didn't spend that money, they invested it. In General Motors, in U.S. Rubber, in dozens of chemical companies. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, DuPont had a $100 million cash reserve. While other families watched their net worth evaporate, DuPont bought. They acquired Remington Arms. They increased their stake in General Motors from 23% to 43%. They bought dozens of smaller chemical companies at bankruptcy prices. By 1940, they controlled an industrial empire worth $3 billion in 1940 dollars. They didn't pick winners and losers. They bought categories. If one sector collapsed, another expanded. If the whole economy collapsed, they had cash to buy the wreckage. The DuPont family currently controls an estimated $15 billion through various trusts and holding companies. But these are all old dynasties, industrial age families. Let me show you how this strategy evolved in the 20th century. The Mellon family doesn't just use the system. For 3 generations, they've helped run it. Andrew Mellon served as Treasury Secretary under 3 presidents, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. He's still the longest-serving Treasury Secretary in American history. While he was setting tax policy for the nation, his family's bank, Mellon National Bank, was financing the companies that benefited from that policy. During the 1920s, Mellon pushed through massive tax cuts for the wealthy. The top marginal rate dropped from 73% to 24%. The Mellon family's net worth tripled during that decade. Then came 1929. The stock market crashed. Banks failed. Millions lost everything. The Mellons had already shifted to cash and bonds. While the market collapsed, they were buying. Gulf Oil, Alcoa, Copper's Company, Carborundum, all at depression prices. By 1937, Andrew Mellon's estate was worth over $300 million, roughly $6 billion today, more than before the crash. But here's where it gets interesting. The Mellon family didn't just buy companies. They built institutions. The Mellon Foundation, Carnegie Mellon University, the National Gallery of Art, which Mellon personally funded and filled with art he'd bought during the Depression at liquidation prices. These institutions don't just preserve wealth, they multiply influence. Today, the Mellon family's combined holdings, through trusts, foundations, and BNY Mellon, exceed $25 billion. But even the Mellons look small compared to the family that perfected this strategy for the modern era. The Waltons aren't old money. Sam Walton opened the first Walmart in 1962. But what the Walton family built in 60 years makes the Rockefellers look patient. Here's the pattern. Every recession since 1970 has been a growth event for Walmart, not despite the hard times, because of them. 1973 oil crisis, consumers needed lower prices. Walmart expanded. 1981 recession, competitors went bankrupt. Walmart bought their locations. 1991, 2001, 2008, same story every single time. While other retailers collapsed, Kmart, Sears, J.C. Penney, Toys R Us, Walmart absorbed their market share like a sponge absorbs water. In 2008, during the worst financial crisis since the Depression, Walmart's stock rose 18%. The S&P 500 fell 38%. The Walton family's net worth increased by $12 billion that year. How? Two things. First, counter-cyclical demand. When people lose money, they don't stop buying. They buy cheaper. And nobody sells cheaper than Walmart. Second, liquidity. The Waltons control Walmart through Walton Enterprises, LLC, a family holding company that maintains massive cash reserves. When competitors weaken, they acquire. When real estate crashes, they expand. Today, the Walton family is worth over $260 billion. That's more than the GDP of Portugal. And here's the detail that should make you uncomfortable. Walmart employs 1.6 million Americans. A significant percentage of those workers qualify for food stamps and Medicaid. A 2014 report from Americans for Tax Fairness estimated that Walmart's low wages cost taxpayers around $6 billion per year in public assistance. The American taxpayer subsidizes Walmart's labor costs. The Waltons capture the profit. That's not a bug in the system. That's the system working exactly as designed. You've now seen 6 families use the same basic strategy. Hold cash, wait for crisis. Buy distressed assets, repeat. Simple, right? Except it's not, because the strategy requires something you don't have. First, liquidity. When markets crash, banks stop lending, credit freezes. These families don't need loans. They have private banking relationships that trace back generations in family offices with direct lines to institutional capital. When credit freezes for you, it stays liquid for them. Second, information. A 2021 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that wealthy households adjust their portfolios an average of 6 months before major market corrections. Not because they know the exact date, not because they have a crystal ball, but when you sit close enough to power, when you're on corporate boards, when you attend Davos, when you dine with Fed officials, you feel policy tightening before markets do. You hear the tone shift in private conversations before it shows up in public statements. You find out when you check your 401k. They find out at dinner parties. Third, taxes. The Tax Policy Center estimates that dynastic families pay effective tax rates below 10% through trusts, foundations, and stepped-up basis rules. You pay taxes on income. They pay taxes on nothing until they choose to. Fourth, political access. Open Secrets data shows the top 50 political donors gave over $1 billion to campaigns and PACs in 2024 alone. When regulations threaten their businesses, they don't write letters to the editor. They call their senator's personal cell phone. This isn't conspiracy, it's infrastructure. So what does this mean for you? You are not going to become the next Walton or Rockefeller, neither am I. But understanding how the system works changes how you should think about your own position. When the next recession hits, and according to the Conference Board's leading economic indicators, we're closer than most people think, here's what will happen. Your 401k will drop. Your home equity will shrink. Your job might be at risk. And while you're panicking, someone else will be buying. Your company's stock, your neighbor's foreclosed house, the distressed bonds in your pension fund. That's not pessimism. That's pattern recognition. Since 1950, there have been 12 recessions. After every single one, wealth concentration increased. Not because the economy recovered, because the recovery was captured by those who had cash at the bottom. In 2020, American billionaires increased their wealth by $1.3 trillion during a pandemic that killed 1 million people and pushed 8 million into poverty. The families I've shown you aren't evil, they're rational. They've learned over generations that American capitalism rewards those who can survive the collapses. You can't copy their access, but you can copy the discipline. Liquidity over leverage, patience over panic, the willingness to be inefficient during booms so you're not desperate during busts. That won't make you a dynasty, but it might keep you from being harvested by one. Now here's the uncomfortable ending. I could tell you that awareness changes things, that if enough people understand this system, we could reform it. But the families I've described have survived 40 presidential administrations, 120 Congresses, 2 world wars, and a civil war. They've been investigated, they've been broken up, they've been taxed and regulated and publicly shamed, and they're still here, still richer than ever. The Morgans became J.P. Morgan Chase. The Rockefellers became Rockefeller Capital Management. The Mellons became BNY Mellon. The Waltons just became more. The one thing that could change this is sustained political will to restructure how wealth transfers between generations. But the people with the power to make that change are funded by the people who benefit from the current system. So no, I don't have a hopeful ending, but I do have a clear one. You don't beat this system by fighting it. You survive it by understanding where you actually stand. The next crash is coming, it always does. And now you know what it really is. Not a disaster, a transfer. The only question is which side of that transfer you're on. Subscribe, because when it finally unfolds, you'll want to see it clearly.